Right, good morning everyone and welcome to the Equal Opportunity Committee's 7th meeting of 2013, and can I also welcome the observers in the public gallery. Can I remind everyone to either switch their mobile phones completely off or put them on to flight mode. I'd like to start the morning with some introductions. Our clerks, researchers and official reporters are at the table to my left, and around the room we are supported by Broadcasting Services and the Security Office. My name is Mary Fee and I'm the committee convener. Can I ask that members and witnesses now introduce themselves in turn, starting on my right?
Marco Biaggi, MSP for Edinburgh Central and Deputy Convener.
Good morning, John Finney, MSP Highlands and Islands.
John Mason, MSP for Glasgow Shettleston.
James Dornan, MSP for Glasgow Cathcart.
Paul McMahon, MSP for Central Scotland.
Alec Johnston, MSP North East Scotland.
Lynn Welsh, Head of Legal at the Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Alistair Pringle, National Director, Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Ian Atchison, Chief Operating Officer, Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Thank you for that. Agenda item 1 this morning is evidence on the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Can I welcome our witnesses, and can I ask that you begin by explaining your role at the EHRC before I open it up to questions? Alistair, would you like to
Absolutely,
start?
yes. I've been the National Director in Scotland since November of last year. So my role really is around management, around the strategy and delivery of our work in Scotland.
Thank you for that. Ian?
I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I was appointed to the Commission in September of last year. My role is largely about delivering the corporate business of the Commission across Great Britain.
Thank you for that.
I head up the legal team which does the legal enforcement work and casework and training and transfer of expertise, and was acting co-director for a short time last year.
Thank you very much for that. Members have a number of questions, and I'm going to start with Marco Biaggi and then move on to John Finney. Marco.
Thank you, Convener. I suspect a lot of the questions from the committee will revolve around the issue of capacity at the EHRC to undertake your duties. So, as a starter for 10, could you outline for me how the changes in the structure will allow you to continue to offer sufficient advisory work and guidance to employers in particular to head off any human rights difficulties that they might have at the pass?
You'll be aware that following the review of the Equality and Human Rights Commission across GB, we've had the helpline services removed from our funding, and they've now been moved to a central service that's run, sponsored by the Government Equality Office and run centrally. So that is now no longer our area of responsibility in terms of providing that sort of advice. I'm going to ask Lynn Welsh to clarify for me what the new advisory service does offer specifically to employers.
The new advice helpline doesn't advise employers, it only advises employees and users of services. However, the Commission has continued to produce guidance and codes, technical guidance for employers, most recently just last week, the week before, when we did one on the new religion and belief issues for small employers. So we try to use our resources most effectively by producing guidance, putting stuff onto the web, rather than giving one-to-one advice.
Yes, the guide to religion or belief in the workplace, I'm fairly familiar with it. It's been quite high profile after the European court cases, where clearly 3 went one way and 1 went the other, and therefore there might be potential for confusion. Guidance like this, I mean, it's available on your website if someone goes looking for it, but how would you actively disseminate that?
For that one, we put out press releases, directly emailed organisations, usually umbrella organisations that we work with, and try and draw attention to it in any ways that we can. Obviously, we go out and do quite a lot of talking and meeting stakeholders and stuff, so we would tend to take out information about new advice and stuff through those methods also.
And when did the original advice that this was updating come out, roughly? Would have been a
I don't think we've actually done advice specifically on religion and belief. I think this is probably the first piece specifically triggered by that particular case. We have done a code of practice that was laid before the Westminster Parliament, a statutory code, which was laid, I think, in 2010.
And how was that promoted at that point? Was that the same sort of
in much the
direct
same way?
engagement
It was put onto the web, and we held could be consultation events to get feedback on the code before it was finalised, and then we contacted the same groups of people who've been involved in providing the feedback to tell them that the code and the guidance is available on the web.
And do you get many inquiries from larger employers? The helpline is aimed at smaller employers. Do you get many inquiries from larger employers, major companies that maybe are concerned about the reputational issues with regard to this particular piece of guidance, and do you have the capacity to respond to those?
When we had a helpline, we did, but the helpline obviously stopped functioning in October last year, and we are trying to make arrangements with the new GEO helpline to get statistics from them exactly around that kind of issue, so that we'll get a clear picture. But that's in its early formative stages, I think it would be fair to say.
If I could just add, I suppose one of the ways we've been trying to address some of the reduction in our capacity is to look at how we work across GB as a whole. We don't have a significant amount of resource currently focusing on employers or on the private sector. So what we have been doing is drafting up a private sector strategy for GB as a whole. So it will be run using resources from right across the office. And I don't know, Ian wants to spell out some of the sort of key elements of what that private sector strategy will look like.
Yes, I think it's fair to say this is relatively new territory for us, where we're trying to forge a relationship with private sector employers, and we've had some significant success, I think. For example, we're working with some fairly big FTSE 350 employers to come up with an equality standard which we can support, which is a sort of kite mark that will promote equality and enable companies to reach a standard that we believe will promote fairness in the workplace. So that's a key plank in our private sector strategy. But just to echo what Alistair has said, there's no doubt about it that we have less capacity and less direct involvement since the helpline was removed from our direct control in receiving intelligence and indeed in providing direct guidance. So what our strategy has to do now is to work more with enabling employers and employees to understand what their responsibilities are in terms of equality, particularly in the workplace, and a strategy that helps us work hand in hand with people rather than directly funding work which we might have done in the past, because we don't have the capacity to do that.
Okay. I'll bring in John Finney and then Siobhan McMahon.
Good morning. I personally sooner have the people who made decisions about your funding sitting there rather than your good self, so I do appreciate the role you have. Can I say in relation to what the UK Government have said in this, they've said they've decided to scrap vague, unnecessary and obsolete provisions. Now, that being the case, have you sufficient resources to undertake the work that you're delegated?
Things were looking a little bit bleaker last summer, it has to be said. We were, at that time, working towards, in Scotland, a directorate in the size of about 10 staff plus a national director. Following the core budget review, which was really to look at what we essentially needed to deliver our core functions, we are somewhat happier with the budget that we've now received across GB as a whole. We're now looking to, in the region of 17.5 full-time equivalent staff, hopefully by the end of this year. We have had to obviously change the way that we do our business. We don't have necessarily the same level of capacity to do some of our stakeholder engagement work, so we are having to work through other agencies rather than necessarily do some of that work ourselves. That said, we've been working closely with the new Board of Commissioners at GB level and with our statutory Scotland committee to design a work plan for the year ahead, which actually we're quite happy with. It covers a significant amount of ground. It definitely focuses more on working through others. So, for example, some of our work with audit and inspection bodies, looking at how regulation can positively promote equality through the services that they regulate. Overall, we feel that we have now a budget that will allow us to deliver our core functions. We also have, across GB as a whole, a pot of in the region of £8 million to deliver new programme work. We've been working through a bidding process around that across the Commission to work out which programmes would best fit the criteria for that pot of money. So, given the fact Helpline has been removed and grants have been removed from our control, overall we have, our budget cut has been at the same level as other publicly funded bodies who have been going through a similar process at GB level. In a way, we would obviously like more resources because we could do more, but we do feel that we've now got, compared to where we were in the summer, we feel we've now got the funding that we require to deliver our core functions in Scotland in a slightly different way.
Would it be possible for you to share that work plan with the committee, and indeed the rough working of it? I presume there's a workload assessment done in respect of each task, and similarly a workload assessment done in respect of the tasks any individual staff member would be anticipated to undertake.
Yeah, part of what we've been going through in response really to the budget cuts, and Ian might want to say a wee bit more about the change programme, because we've had to introduce new ways of working across the Commission to actually become more of I suppose, to utilise better the more limited resources we have across GB as a whole. So maybe ask Ian to say a wee bit about the change programme and what that's meant in terms of staffing and resources and how we allocate, and then I'll come back to saying what we plan to do with that in terms of our draft business plan for the year ahead.
I wonder if you could also, there's a statutory obligation to consult with trade unions and staff associations with any substantive changes in the workplace. So if that can be alluded to as well, and as part of any workplace assessment would be a stress assessment. And clearly, if you have a workload and if a reduced number to undertake that workload, so any information you could share just now or in future with documents with that would be helpful. Thank you.
I think it's important to say at the start that such is the breadth of the remit the Commission has, there would simply never be enough capacity to respond to all the requests for help we have. So we've always been in a position where we've had to have some form of triage and assessment of what we can do to intervene either on behalf of people, to support people, or to regulate. That has been thrown into sharper relief because of the significant reduction in resources that we've had. So we've had to examine how the whole Commission operates to make sure it is operating in as flexible and effective a way as possible to deliver our programme of objectives for next year. We were, as Alistair has alluded, potentially in a much worse position when we were considering budget cuts as a starting offer from our colleagues in the Government Equalities Office in spring of this year. So I'm very pleased to reiterate that we've done a very comprehensive argument for the steady state funding that we've got for the next 2 years, which will give us approximately 200 people across the Commission to deliver its business. I'm very keen indeed that two things happen as a result of that, just to give you some context. And one is that we retain, as we're required to do so, a strong and distinct presence in both Scotland and Wales to deliver the Commission's business corporately and those bits of business that the Scotland Committee and the Wales Committee decide to do and can resource.
Can I just confirm you'll be maintaining a strong presence in England as well, presumably?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, proportionately stronger, you might say, given the size of population. But what we needed to make sure that we were doing is directing staff as effectively as possible. We were in a position in the spring of last year where we were going to have to radically change the structure of the organisation because of anticipated much more severe budget cuts for next year and the year after. In the event those didn't materialise, which gave us, if you like, a sort of a nice problem, and that is how do we most effectively brigade and direct the people that we have to deliver our business. And the way that we thought was the most effective response to that was to have a resource pool concept where we were allowing people from across the Commission to work on business according to the skills that they had. One of the benefits of that being that we unlocked some potential across the organisation. Now, the practical reality in Scotland and Wales, because of the requirement to work in Scotland and because of different jurisdictional and legal requirements, is that there will be less of that flexible working than there probably would be in England. However, we still want to make sure we're deploying everybody across the organisation as effectively as possible. But that will start with ensuring that Scotland can deliver its business in Scotland. The process that we are going through, just to put a bit more flesh on the bones, is that we're currently looking at a series of options that we've identified for work next year, and Alistair may allude to some of that specific Scottish work later. Our commission, our GB Commission, and Caliani Lyle, who's the Scottish Commissioner, is obviously part of the board, will consider some of the options that we've identified. We will then go through a process of assigning people to those options, which hasn't really been done in the same way in the past, to make sure that we have properly resourced the work that we say we are going to do. Because one of the criticisms that I think was rightly levelled at us over the past number of years is that we've been very good at over-promising and under-delivering. And that again reflects the nature of the work that we've got in the span of activity and the requests for help and assistance that we get. This year we're trying to be much more modest, reflecting the reduced resources we have, and much more intelligent about how we resource those activities. So implicit in that assignment process, which will take place after we've got the options that the board want to take forward green-lighted, will be to make sure that the right people, the right amount of the right people are working in the right way to deliver those objectives. So implicit in that is an examination of workload. I know that people have been through the ringer in the organisation. We've gone through a period of significant turbulence and uncertainty, and that was particularly the case in Scotland, I think, when you were having to contemplate a significant reduction in headcount. This was prior to my appointment. And there were some very difficult conversations with staff, which in the event, we're pleased to say, didn't materialise in terms of a reduction to, I think it was 10 and a national director. We're still now working on the basis of 17.5, I believe, and a national director. But it still put people through a significant amount of, I'm afraid, unavoidable stress, because as an organisation, we were having to react to a scenario which envisaged a significantly reduced budget than the one we've actually arrived at, one that is consistent, I think, with delivering our legal requirements as a regulator for equality, and consistent also with retaining our A status as a human rights institution.
I was going to ask about the resource pool. It appears that it could just be a sop to mask staff reductions, particularly when you talk about the different jurisdictions and the specific knowledge that would need to operate. How would that be applied to staff working in Scotland? And what have the trade unions and staff associations had to say about that, please?
Alistair, do you want to say a bit more locally about how you've been doing that?
Yeah. Unions have been involved throughout the process, and I think we'll be happy to sort of follow up with a bit more detail on that. I don't have anything to hand other than the fact that we have been engaging throughout and with staff groups.
And have they suggested alternatives at all? Have they been examined?
I'm not sure about that.
I mean, it's certainly fair to say that the trade union side have significant concerns about a resource pool model, and there has been the consultation that is required, and there will be an ongoing conversation with staff associations. We believe that this is the right model for the Commission. This will not only deliver, it's easy to use words like efficiency and effectiveness. I understand that it's sometimes covered for something else, but certainly so far as I am concerned, what I want to do is develop the capacity of people working in the organisation in a way that hasn't been possible in the past. We are still coping to some extent with a legacy of a sort of shotgun marriage of three regulators at the inception of the Commission in 2007, where people are still working in silos to some extent and still have an idea that they only operate across a certain narrow aspect of the Commission's business. What we want to do is to say, actually, if you've got the potential and if you've got the skills, you can work across the Commission's business. And that will be important for the career development of people in Scotland and Wales who will be able to participate in corporate business across GB. To give you an example of that, we are considering that there will be a national piece of work next year on modern apprenticeships. And because of the work and the experience that Scotland have already in the capacity, I'm quite keen, and obviously this is still being considered by commissioners, it hasn't been finalised yet, but I'm quite keen that Scotland might lead that piece of work, because it's important that other countries within Great Britain take the lead in delivering some of the nationally significant work that we have. So yes, we are in consultation with trade unions. I'm not going to hide behind the fact that they are not happy with conceptually what we're proposing, but I do believe, and our executive team is clear, that this is a sensible and intelligent way to spend the scarce resources that we have to the maximum effect. And also the consequence of that is to unfreeze and unlock some of the talent within the organisation, across the organisation, so that people can be developed properly.
And can I understand that we have a shared view of what the word consultation means? Do you mean you engage, take on board some of their issues, or do you mean you tell them what you've decided?
No. We are very clear. We're a new executive team, and we're trying to take the organisation in a new direction after a period of very significant turbulence and after, you'll be aware, a period of some quite sustained criticism, a lot of which I would have to say is legitimate about how the organisation has operated in the past. So we have a credibility issue that we need to tackle. There are many brilliant people, passionate and committed people working across the Commission. I wouldn't have joined the Commission knowing what I did about its reputation if I wasn't convinced that there was a job of work to do here, and we had a very important and significant role to play to make society fairer. So I want the people who hold that passion and commitment inside the organisation to be developed, but I also want us to be efficient and effective in what we do. And the way that we have decided as an executive team to do that is through a resource pool concept, which will support people to deliver our business. And what we have to do is go out and win the argument. And it's by no means a kind of black and white situation. We are explaining to people, we are in the process of explaining to people how the resource pool will work, what the benefits will be to them, what the benefits will be to our delivery of our business for next year. And I'm confident we're going to win that argument and bring people on side. But we've got to keep talking to staff associations.
With respect, Mr. Aitchison, if you're consulting,
yeah.
You'll know other people's views. You'll know your staff's views, and
yes.
Your staff are your most valuable resort. Is the die cast, or is there opportunities there to shape the shape of the organisation still with the involvement of your staff?
Well, I think we have decided that we are going to use the resource pool concept for the reasons I hope I've articulated. But we will.
Well, that's telling rather than consulting, then.
Well, we have consulted on that change, and where we get feedback that is constructive, where we've got views identified that we haven't thought about, where we can change how we do things, we certainly will be doing that. It doesn't make any sense to maintain a kind of permanent opposition at all. We're not in that business. We will consult with trade unions. We will consult with our staff, whether they are in trade unions or not, because, as you say, they are our most valuable resource. And they are the people that deliver our business at the end of the day. And we are listening very hard to what they say and trying to change the organisation for everybody's benefit. And it would be frankly crazy not to take those concerns into account and make sure we're explaining ourselves, and where it is possible we are adjusting how we implement the changes that I've been describing.
Okay, finally, can you confirm that's an ongoing process rather than...
It never stops. It never stops, and we will have to. Sorry, to make the final point, we're going to have to review how the resource pool is working, and we will do that, because it's not in our interest if something isn't working effectively to continue to do it. As I've said, we have fewer resources, we have some big challenges, we have some critics who are, we need to at least neutralise, if not bring on side, in terms of the work that we're doing and the value that we deliver to citizens across Great Britain. And I am certain this is the way to do it. But if it isn't, and if experience demonstrates that we need to work in a different way or restructure ourselves differently or employ a different concept, we will do. But I am genuinely convinced that what we can do through the resource pool mechanism is release some of the talent that is stuck at the minute in various old hierarchies and silos across the organisation and improve opportunity for our people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I suppose one thing to say is that in the review of the Directorate in Scotland, it wasn't so much a case of over-promising and under-delivering, but it has been an issue across the Commission elsewhere. We're happy to offer more information on where we can around union involvement. I think the other thing about the introduction of this resource pool model, when we looked at the principles of it, we have been working this way in Scotland for some time. We have to. We don't operate in silos. We have legal, policy, parliamentary and communications staff all sitting in one room, and to take forward any of our work, we need all those people. And that is really the basis of the principles of what's been introduced. So staff, certainly in Scotland, haven't been overly perturbed at the introduction of the concept of resource pool. What we've been discussing is the fact that even though we are part of a GB organisation, we do have a level of autonomy, and we have to because of our structures and because of legal and political systems being so different. It's not going to be easy for a member of staff to wake up one day and find out that they're being sent to Cardiff the next day. That won't be happening. But it will. What I like about the model is that it does give staff an opportunity to look to contribute to new programmes of work, inquiries, for instance, which they might not get a chance to do in their own offices, be that in Birmingham or in Glasgow or in Cardiff. So staff in Scotland certainly appear to be reasonably happy with the principles, and our view is that let's test it out and let's make sure that the architecture of it isn't overly rigid, and that we can use this model to our best advantage to deliver what we need to. To add on to that, the fact that we have engaged with staff, and there is a staff support line available for staff to call. So that's one of the things that's been put in place to address concerns of staff groups. You asked also about the business plan, and we're happy to share that as soon as it's in a state fit to share. But I can share with you, Ian's already mentioned the fact that we're looking at a modern apprenticeships piece of work led by Scotland for GB. At the most recent meeting of the Board of Commissioners, there was discussion around a range of activity, including digital inclusion, women in senior management, and work in response to welfare reform, all of which are relevant to Scotland. So we were quite pleased with the overall high-level package. We obviously have a set of new Scotland-specific duties in relation to the public sector equality duty, and we'll be doing a fair bit of work on that in spring once equality outcomes have been published and the other publishing requirements of public authorities have been fulfilled. We will be looking at to work with a new single police service. Obviously, it's a good opportunity with a new organisation to ensure equality is embedded across their functions. We'll be following on work in relation to the human trafficking inquiry, which we're very pleased with. On the 6th of March, we'll see a 1 year on follow-up report published. I think it's being launched here. To continue some work around disability harassment inquiry. And also we're particularly interested in looking at schools and school-based bullying and how that's reported, particularly around identity-based harassment. We've got ongoing work with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. I'm sure you're all aware that they have responsibility primarily for devolved aspects of human rights. But we do work closely with them. For instance, a piece of work that we've been developing around human rights and equality impact assessment. So that gives you a flavour of some of our proposed areas of Scotland-specific work and GB work, which the resource pool will allow us to staff across GB.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
This may be a very obvious thing to say, but that seems like quite a lot given your staffing.
Yeah, the Scotland-specific work, a lot of it will be sort of improvement-focused work. So, for instance, work with regulators. We've been working with them for the last couple of years to build capacity, knowledge and understanding of equality and how it might contribute to their activity. What we would envisage is more depth work, so focusing on one specific area of regulation, for instance, or working with schools to look at one particular area around reporting to identify small measurable improvements and then look at taking them to scale. So really putting more of the onus on other bodies to fulfil their quality requirements rather than us delivering it on their behalf. So that's the sort of model that we are proposing to take forward. I mean, it's also fair to say
is there a timescale set out for a potential progress check on when you can stop and look back and see whether you have been able to achieve added value or whether you've perhaps spread yourself too thin and go through a lessons learned exercise?
Yeah. I think that's a really useful point. We've been discussing that extensively within the senior management team of the organisation. It's certainly been one of the failings in the past, is having great ideas of things which seem important but not being particularly good around project management, so the design, development and delivery of our programmes of work. We've established quite a clear process, a sort of pipeline around how we take work into the organisation, and if we're not taking it into the organisation, why, so we can make a very clear case for what work we're doing and what work we're not doing. A much clearer assignment process, so being clear about what it is we expect to deliver by when, feeding then into who's going to deliver this work, and that's where the resource pool comes in. And then Ian has overall responsibility around the delivery side of it, so making sure that we are delivering the outcomes we said we would by when, and if not, that we've got very clear markers or flags in place to say, if we're not delivering this, or if this work needs to be scaled up in some shape or form, how do we prioritise that across the organisation? So that's kind of the architectural model that we are, to be honest, only just starting to test out. But we acknowledge that's been a failing in the past within the organisation.
So am I right in understanding it's not really one big progress check, but you intend to try and have it for each stream?
Yes, I mean, on the 27th of March, the board will approve our business plan, and there's obviously work ongoing to refine some of the options we've presented to them. What I envisage is after that date, when we get into the new business year from April the 1st, on a monthly basis, we will be examining all the assignments that get created out of those options. The assignments will have, as part of their structure, milestones for delivery. So we will have a structure on a monthly basis to look at all the due milestones across all the work that we are doing, to track progress, and where there hasn't been progress, to understand why, so we can report, again, intelligently and in a timely manner back to the board. And the other crucial thing that we are able to do by having a resource management approach, a corporate resource management approach, is to be able to have, for example, Alistair say, we are unable, because of circumstances outside our control, we're unable to deliver this work because key people are missing. Well, there is a possibility, at least then, from within the corporate resources of the organisation to be able to plug that gap if that work is a priority. Now, of course, what Alistair and Lynn would say is, because of jurisdictional and legal issues, that can get quite complicated, so we have to keep a very close eye. In other words, what I'm saying is a lawyer from Croydon might not be much use to you up here if you're doing something Scottish specific. But there are ways of moving resources around, and I'm absolutely clear that doesn't mean abstracting them from Scotland and Wales when it's appropriate. It means also, when it's appropriate, moving them from English-based resources as well. But of course, because of the differences described, that will be difficult. But one of the things that we must do, and we will be held to account for very closely by Government Equalities Office, who are our sponsoring agency, is having a system to say we're on track for delivering things. The scale of what we are saying we're going to deliver is manageable. It's being monitored, and one of the problems we've had in the past, I think, is not knowing what it is that we're actually monitoring, because of how the deliverables were constructed. So you get vagueness in and vagueness out, as it were. And we're going to be much more disciplined this year in saying this is the outcome that we are trying to deliver in whatever piece of work it is, whether it's Scottish-specific work, whether it's corporate GB work, and being able to interrogate that all the way along. Frankly, we don't have any option but to have that disciplined view of it, given the circumstances and the history that we've got.
Just before I bring in Siobhan McMahon, and it follows on from the point that Marco Biaggi raised, and it is about that monitoring of the outcomes, and it's been a concern that's been raised to us that because of the cuts in your resources and the cuts in staffing, that you will be unable to properly monitor outcomes and make assessments. Do you think that's a viable concern, and do you see going forward that being a difficulty, given the rest of your work programme, which you've touched on this morning?
Well, I'm very confident that we will have the capacity to monitor what we do. I think it's a good point, and one of the things we have to guard against, of course, in terms of the shape of the organisation, is that we don't have a monitoring becomes the master rather than the servant of action and delivery. What we start from, I think, this year, which gives us a bit more hope that we will deliver, is a quite determinedly more modest approach to what we are trying to deliver this year. I know there's a comment has been made about it being fairly ambitious. Well, actually, in relation to what we had to deliver over the course of this last 12 months, we are reducing very significantly what we think our promises are going to be for next year. So if we start from that smaller amount of things to deliver, I think it follows that we ought to be better at making sure that we're actually going to deliver them.
Okay, thanks for that. Siobhan McMahon, and John, then followed by John Mason.
Thank you. As we know, Mr Pringle, you said at the start that the helpline is not the area of your responsibility now. But I'm sure you would agree that the people who phone that helpline from Scotland are. And given that we know that the calls from Scotland have went down from 400 to 210 between October, when the helpline obviously was removed, until January, how are you actively engaging with those individuals who would have phoned? Because that's nearly a half of those calls have gone now, and clearly they did need advice, so that would be your responsibility. How do you engage?
Yeah, I mean, we have been concerned about the loss of the helpline and the loss of the Scotland-specific expertise. I'm going to bring Lynn Welsh in, because one of the ways that we've been trying to address the deficit is by investing quite a lot of staff time and energy in a transfer of expertise programme, so trying to build up knowledge and expertise of other advice givers across the country, and trying to look at how we can engage more broadly across the country, possibly more strategically with public bodies to raise their awareness and understanding where it might be appropriate that they can offer some areas of advice and support. So that's one of the areas. One of the other things that we are keen to do, and we have been feeding our concerns into the into the central team within GB, who are liaising with the UK government over the management of the contract, are some of the concerns that are being raised, some of the calls that we've received from people who have used the line. So we are very keen to improve the national, the UK helpline service, and we'll do all we can to build capacity, understanding of Scottish issues and Scottish agencies. But also, this transfer of expertise programme is an important plank in our work. So, Lynn, you might want to say a wee bit about transfer of expertise.
I mean, the idea behind it is to try and get more advisors and lawyers across Scotland skilled enough to give good advice and to provide assistance to people, because discrimination and human rights law, I suppose, both are not well understood and not well resourced, if you like, in the way of advice. I mean, I think losing a helpline, especially the Scotland part of the helpline, has been a serious problem. We are not now capable of giving advice to people who want to call us, so we have to put a lot of resource into upskilling and supporting the new advice line that's been set up, and we've been in touch with them to try and ensure that they have the right contacts, the right referral systems to serve Scotland properly.
So what you're telling me is that there is nothing that you can do to set up an additional line in Scotland, for instance, because the line that is there now cannot give advice on devolved matters, I understand. So if that is the case, there's a lack in Scotland.
Yeah, no, it can give advice around devolved issues and should be doing that. It is restricted in who it gives advice to. As I say, it doesn't give advice to like employers and service providers, only to service users, but it should be giving advice about devolved as well as reserved issues, because obviously discrimination and human rights are a mix of devolved and reserved issues. So it should be, we can't know. I mean, we've had our money removed in relation to helpline provision, and that money is now put into the new helpline that's out with our control. So we could not set up another helpline for Scotland.
But the new helpline hasn't referred one single piece of intelligence or possible legal case, I hear, to
It has
to
not.
HRC.
We've so far had no referrals in Scotland. I think there have been a small number in England, none in Scotland at all.
So
the
that's quite concerning in itself.
Yes, it does. I have to say concern me and us in Scotland generally, and we've been in contact with the helpline to speak to them about that. They are aware that there's maybe a deficit around Scotland. I think they're going to try to engage the Scottish Government in that. We've provided them, I say, with a lot of intelligence and information about who they should be in contact with. We're quite happy to train them if that would be of assistance to them. But in effect, we have to put our resources into improving them. We don't really have resource to set up something separate.
Okay, and you mentioned, obviously, this is a UK government, Joe, and clearly the cuts have come from Westminster. However, the Scottish Government was mentioned there, so have you made representation to the Scottish Government to outline your concerns about clearly cases not being passed? Because, I mean, if 200 people are looking for advice, not getting it, don't know where to turn to, and it's great that upskilling is going to happen, but you don't know where to turn because you're used to phoning a number. So you're not getting that now. When you do phone for that advice, it's not passed. There is no legal cases happening. We're nearly 6 months down the line and nothing's happening like that. I mean, it's a huge concern. So how do we address that?
I think all we can do is push that helpline to improve itself and tell the UK Government about the concerns that we have for it.
And we have shared a range of concerns over the cuts with the Scottish Government. We've met with them regularly and occasionally with ministers, so they are aware of the range of concerns and have also expressed their concerns at the cuts to the UK Government.
It's fine expressing concerns, though. It's active work that I'm requiring on both parts.
Can I just add to that the contract for this service is with Sitel, the provider, is managed by the Government Equalities Office, and given the concerns that you've raised and some of the initial feedback that we have received from GEO, I will make sure that we keep an extremely close eye on the productivity and the delivery of this service, and if it is clear that Scotland is not being properly served by it, whether that's a capacity problem or a training problem, whatever it is, because the figures are quite stark as we understand them at the minute in terms of referrals. We will be putting pressure on GEO to take the steps it can do contractually to enforce a good service. And I'm quite happy to get back to you on the basis of information that isn't commercially in confidence. I'm not clear about how the contract operates, but there will be information about performance. We will make clear your concerns to GEO about a Scottish-related performance and respond to that, to the committee.
That'd be helpful. Just on the monitoring part, which of course the convener led on there, it was said that you're very confident about the need, monitoring and what you can do with the capacity that you have. However, I'm quite concerned about equal pay audits. And what's been happening across the country. And it's my understanding that only 11 public bodies, so councils and health boards I'll concentrate on at the moment, have carried out a pay audit. And only 3 of those meet the 5% criteria set by the HRC. Now, given that that's happening now and happened when there was a greater capacity, how are you going to be able to monitor the equality duties of over 250 public bodies?
The equality duty work, I mean, we have a firm plan in place and we will be rolling out, we'll be getting researchers in to actually go and check all of the outcomes set, all of the publication that requires to be done under those duties, including publishing pay gap information and publishing equal pay policies and occupational segregation information. And we are intending to look at all of that and ensure that those have been properly published by all of the bodies.
At the minute, there's only a 20% compliance rate of equal pay audits across Scotland. And I'll quote, just for the benefit of the committee in the official report, the HRC say, an equal pay audit is the most effective way of establishing whether your organisation is providing equal pay and rewarding employees fairly in practice, and is an effective demonstration of action to promote equal pay under the terms of the equality duties. Now, given that that's under the equality duties, and you will be looking at the equality duties in the spring, how on earth are we in a situation in Scotland where only 11 public authorities, health boards and councils have provided an equal pay audit?
There's not legal duty for their auditing. The legal duty in the duties is about pay gap information and equal pay policies and occupational segregation. We absolutely say equal pay audits are a great way of actually working out how fair your pay system is. And there's been much discussion about whether that should become an enforceable part of legislation. And pushing good practice around it. So what we'll be concentrating on are the specific duties themselves and looking at pay gap information and equal pay policies around all of the public bodies in Scotland who are covered by the duties.
It's my understanding the equal pay gap on gender is required, it's just on ethnicity and disability it's not required. Is that not the case? So only because, as I said, it carries on and said, equal pay analysis for ethnicity and disability are not required by the specific duties. So it carries on by saying that.
Yeah, I think that what the specific duty requires is, I say, a publication of a pay gap, which is sort of average hourly male and female salaries. There's also a separate duty then to publish equal pay policies and information on occupational segregation. The first publication for that is about gender only, and the second publication, which will be 4 years on, is gender, disability and race, all three.
Okay, but given that you think it's the most effective way, and
yes,
clearly it's a shocking figure that only 20% are in compliance of that, what proactive work can you do to engage to make sure that organisations are taking that forward? And I understand the capacity issues, you know, I totally understand that, but given that we do have a body here, so and my sense is, of course, work has to be done, and I heard the work programme and that's great, but not one mention of this in that.
I mean, our plan is to, as I say, do research checking to ensure that the duties have been met, to look at where areas of weakness or failure are, and from that information to then design the next pieces of work that we will do. So if publishing equal pay policies is shown to be an area that organisations aren't conforming with, we can look at enforcement action, or we can look at improvement work with various parts of the public sector to see why is this not being done. But that would be around equal pay policies. It's not equal pay audits, which aren't legally enforceable in the same way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And just to say that was encompassed under my sort of headline around public sector equality duties and ensuring compliance. So there'll be a broad piece of work, and as Lynn Welsh has said, we'll be commissioning that piece of work out, because it's obviously going to be a significant piece of desk-based research to make sure that information is available and analysed before we then consider what action we'll take.
Thanks.
Can I just briefly come back to the point that Siobhan McMahon raised about the helpline? And I have to say, from what I've heard this morning, I'm frankly astonished that no alarm bells rang in the EHRC at the lack of referrals, given the months that have gone by. And I do wonder, at what point would someone have noticed that there had been no referrals? And I'm surprised as well that there was not an automatic monitoring put in to make sure that if, say, a month had gone by and there wasn't a referral, the question would have been asked.
We have been raising concerns since the inception of the service about how it's been set up, and also we have been receiving calls from people who've used the service to raise their concerns about the service they've received. So we have been raising these concerns from the start. So it's not just now that that we've taken cognizance of this. We've been feeding that into the Government Equality Office, and I think we're roughly 3 months in, or is it 6 months in? 6 months in from the service, and I think we now have enough evidence across GB to be taking forward with the Government Equality Office. So it's not just now, we have been raising these flags for some time. Do you want to add to that, Lynn, at all?
No, I mean, that's true. I mean, all of the referrals, in effect, come to my team. We have a little mailbox which has remained empty since October. So we have been raising this since the 1st of October. Where are these cases? Where are they coming? But as I say, it's not our service to control, so all we can do is feed that back, that we are concerned, that we have worries, that we're being told by people who are contacting us that they're not perhaps being given the advice they expected. We feed it to the government, as Ian said. We will continue to do so.
I mean, it may seem a very simplistic view that I'm taking, but the lack of referrals seems to me to make the business case for having a helpline in Scotland.
I worked at the Disability Rights Commission before the EHRC, where our helpline was based in Stratford, and it was a good helpline that did really hard work, but found it difficult to meet the needs of Scotland. And we fought extremely hard to get a Scottish helpline in the EHRC. So it was a bit heartbreaking, I have to say, on a personal level, when it disappeared again. And as I say, for me, we now have to concentrate all our efforts on getting the helpline that is there to work the best it can for Scotland, and that is a wee top priority for me and my team to do that, because we find it incredibly difficult to not be getting the cases and information.
How many referrals on average per month did you get before this new service started?
Well, we were in a lucky position of not only having to rely on, if you like, sort of detailed referrals from our helpline. They sat in the same office as us, and they popped round the door to get information from the lawyers to say, is this of interest to you? So we were on a daily basis in discussions and giving support to and receiving information from the Scottish helpline when it was here, and got regular referrals from them.
When you say regular, you couldn't give us an estimate?
I can give you proper figures after this, if that would be helpful,
very helpful
for you.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be very helpful. Thank you for that. I'll bring in John Mason now, to be followed by James Dornan.
Thanks, Convener. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time on the helpline, so I think I'll maybe not ask any more on that. I mean, I was interested in the paper we got. There's 8 bullet points about Scottish projects for 2013-14, and I think actually already that's been expanded on by yourself, Mr. Pringle, in more detail, because it did strike me with these that some are quite specific, but some seemed a bit vague to me. And I'm interested in this area, which has already been touched on, about how we kind of measure the outcomes of these. I mean, the specific one, like bullying in schools, that's pretty clear-cut, seems to me. Whereas the final one, we will implement an ambitious and countrywide transfer of expertise programme, seemed just a little bit vague to me. But I assume behind that there's a bit more detail. Is that the case?
Yeah. We've just evaluated the. Excuse me. Just undertaken an evaluation of the work we did last year in transfer of expertise. So I'll hand back to Lynn Welsh, because it's her area of work. These programmes of work are how we undertake our work is we bring together relevant folk from both across the Scotland Directorate and from elsewhere where we need to bring in expertise. So we would generally have some legal, some policy, if required some parliamentary input. We would be scoping out exactly what we plan to achieve in the year, what outcomes we'd expect to see. We do have pretty rigorous reporting mechanisms in place already, risk registers and as you would expect from any functional organisation. And we do regularly review the work that we're undertaking, making sure that it has achieved its aim. So, I mean, the bullet points really were just designed to give you a flavour of some of the Scotland-specific work behind each. And actually, we'd be happy to share any of that with you. Behind each bullet point, there's substantial work, but it's all backed up with evidence behind why we would do this work, what sort of impact we would expect to achieve, and if we're not achieving that, why. And what is challenging with an organisation like the Equality Human Rights Commission is that we can't deliver equality on our own. Obviously, we're having to work through a range of agencies, frontline services, partners, be it government, be it voluntary sector. So the transfer of expertise is one of those examples where, whereas we can't necessarily demonstrate clearly the impact that we've had on the front line, we can demonstrate the improvement to other agencies' knowledge and awareness of equality law, for example, and their ability then to provide improved services to their constituents, which is really the idea behind the transfer of expertise programme. I'm happy to expand on any of the other bullet points. I mean, we're in the process of working each of these up into a fully formed project plan for the year ahead. But these are the pieces of work that we expect to see integrated into the GB plan as a whole as the Scotland-specific elements.
You wanted to come in, Ms Welsh?
Only really to sort of say, we do have a very detailed plan to transfer of expertise, and as Alistair said, this year we've done a quality evaluation, not only a quantity one, because quantity is easy. I ran a training and 17 people turned up. We've done a really in-depth quality report on it, which we'd be happy to let you see as well, and we have a already planned out system of events for the coming year. Last year we ran 14 and we'll get another 9 or 10 events as well. So it's quite detailed.
I mean, to go back to some of the things you said there, Mr. Pringle, I mean, you talked about you had a reason for each of these issues and why you're looking at them, and I was kind of wondering about that because we already had questions from Mr. Finney about how much the union input had been, which is fine, but I was wondering how much, you know, equality groups, for example, ethnic minority equality groups, how much have they guided, or have you been guided by them as to what are your priorities for the coming few years?
We have a sort of fairly ongoing engagement with a range of third sector and equality organisations and others who help to inform and shape some of the priorities that we take forward in the year. I think, again, where in the past the Commission may have failed to some extent is having a rigorous process around which it builds its business plan priorities. And I don't think this year we've got an ideal process either, to be honest. What the work that we've been trying to do, and certainly since November I've become part of, is to be able to clearly state why we do what we do and why we don't do what we don't do. So to be clearer, because we get evidence and information and requests for action in from all over the place. We have a research and information function at a GB level. We did have that at Scotland level. Unfortunately, we've lost that capacity at the moment, but we are planning to address that this year. So we have a, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we've got a range of mechanisms for identifying potential action we would like to take forward. That includes stakeholder engagement with voluntary sector and equality groups. It includes individual requests for action, and it includes our own research, information and intelligence, for instance, the triennial review. Most of the work that we're currently taking forward is based on our sort of known intelligence. So the triennial review told us what the significant inequalities were in Britain, and indeed that was broken down into Scotland. And additionally, we've looked at over the last year or two any other relevant surveys, census data, which all helps to inform the range of potential projects that we'll take forward. In Scotland, what we've then done is to engage with the Scotland Committee, who are the statutory committee of the Commission, to identify and to prioritise a smaller number of projects of work. Now, about half of these are pieces of work which are ongoing from last year. So the human trafficking work, for example, that's a follow-on because we still have a role to play. Disability harassment work, we still have a role to play. I think the proposals for next year's business plan will be much clearer as to how the voices of stakeholders have helped to shape and inform alongside other research, information and advice.
I mean, you use a word like voices, and I mean, clearly some voices are louder than others, and presumably some equality groups speak louder than others.
Yeah.
So presumably you don't just reflect, you know, how loud somebody shouts, but what you consider are the main issues.
And also that needs to be assessed alongside our role, our unique role and function, and whether it makes sense for us to take something forward, whether it is of a strategic nature. So by undertaking a piece of work in this area, will it have strategic impact across the country? And that's an issue both for our legal work and for our programme activity. And whether other people are already involved in the field. So is there a place for us to take this work forward? So we have a decision-making process which we go through, which asks a range of questions before we will agree to take forward a piece of work in particular.
I mean, would you feel that you have to touch on all if there's 8 protected characteristics under the Equality Act, you know, you have to be looking at all of them to some extent, or not necessarily?
Well, not necessarily. I suppose what we have in place are the Scotland specific duties as part of the public sector equality duty, which do set explicit requirements in setting equality outcomes for all protected characteristics. And if an equality outcome isn't being set, why? So in part, that sets a framework for addressing the range of protected characteristics. If we are not addressing, I think that the same case goes for us. If we feel that there is a gap or if there is an area that we're not addressing, we are questioning ourselves why. And inevitably it's because there is significant work already underway or we don't have a unique place or role at this moment in time. In looking at both the GB work and the Scotland specific work, we have been asking both a statutory question around devolved issues. So is this piece of work relevant or different in Scotland? And if so, how will we reflect that at GB level or locally? And we also have done that high level equality impact assessment to make sure that we are not weighted towards one particular group or other, or if we are, that we've got reasonable evidence behind that.
Because presumably there would be some differences in Scotland. You know, for example, sectarianism, anti-Irish racism is probably bigger here than it would be elsewhere in the UK, so you're taking that into account.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, on a specific one like the bullying in Scottish schools, which was referred to, I mean, has that come from a particular group, or is that just a wider issue and you'd be looking at all the protected characteristics that could be going into bullying in schools?
There is both anecdotal evidence and there's also evidence from organisations like LGBT Youth Scotland around bullying in schools and some concerns about those issues not being addressed. What we would generally do is to look at an area like schools to consider what the range of potential equality issues might be and then make a judgment based on some of the criteria I've already talked about where we think we've got a unique role, where we think that there are opportunities for us to offer advice, guidance or support. So in that particular case, and it's not an area that's fully worked out, these are all, it's important to be absolutely clear, these are draft proposals which we have been putting through a process. They won't be finalised till the end of March, at which point we'll be taking them forward. So we've been going through a range of processes to consider whether we've got enough evidence. Again, in terms of this particular area of work, you're not always going to have the data. I think that's probably an issue that you've been dealing with over the years, is at times it's difficult to get data on issues like prejudice-based bullying for the very fact that many people who are discriminated or disadvantaged don't necessarily want to come forward. So we are basing some of that programme of work on unofficial reporting or on specific issues raised by particular organisations.
Yeah, I think like the schools one, for example, I mean, I would absolutely support anything to tackle bullying of all sorts in schools. I mean, I think the one that does spring to mind is the LGBT community would be raising that. But, I mean, amongst the religious community, there is also concern that kids with a religious commitment do get bullied at school. Yeah. So my only hope would be that you'd be looking at all of that and not just from one particular angle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, prejudice and discrimination comes from the same root, and it doesn't matter who it's targeted at. It comes from the same perpetrators are less interested in what the difference is. So our focus is without a doubt on, and it is in all our work, even if it's one of the other areas we're initially looking at was disabled people's access to banking. But in reality, the issue is about people's ability to access advice and support services online. And that's a case for people who don't understand English necessarily, or for some older people who don't access the internet, or for people in rural parts. And there is there are issues in Scotland in terms of internet access and uptake. So our interest is, as I was saying earlier, to try and focus in depth in an area where we might be able to develop measurable improvements and solutions, and then look at transferability to scale. And that we think is the best way that we can operate with our limited resources. The work in schools and using potentially prejudice-based bullying reporting as a proxy for how well schools are dealing with bullying across the piece may well be an approach that we'll take, but it would be considering all aspects of discriminatory bullying.
And so will success in 5 years' time be that you have done your job and achieved your programme, or will success be that Scotland is more equal?
Ideally, our hope is that Scotland will be more equal, and fair. I mean, that's our aspiration. Our programmes of work are all small attempts to tackle what is a big and complex problem.
And the fact that the resources have been reduced, is that going to, should we be worried that Scotland is not going to be a more equal society in 5 years' time?
I think that's a difficult question to answer at this time and point.
Okay, thank you.
James Dornan.
I think my questions won't be quite as difficult. Could you expand on the relationship between yourselves and the Scottish Human Rights Commission, particularly given the changing circumstances with your own organisation?
Yeah, I mean, the Scottish Human Rights Commission was obviously established and is accountable to the Scottish Parliament, and it deals with primarily devolved aspects of human rights. And we as a GB organisation deal with reserved aspects of human rights at a GB level. If it was only so clear-cut as that, life would probably be easier. We've got a good working relationship with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. We can get involved in areas of work in Scotland on devolved issues with their permission. Our human trafficking inquiry work is one example of where we felt we had the skills, the expertise and the capacity to take forward a piece of work which spanned both reserved and devolved aspects of policy and legislation. And we did that with their support. We meet with them regularly. We have taken forward some collaborative pieces of work. Currently we're working on, I think I've already mentioned, equality and human rights impact assessment activity. We have a different set of powers available to us, and we our sort of memorandum of understanding is that we use jointly the powers and abilities that we have to address equality and human rights issues in Scotland. Obviously, non-discrimination is a key element of human rights principles in the Human Rights Act. So it's incredibly important that we can work together collaboratively. We've recently met with them to look at the Scottish National Action Plan for Human Rights. Without a doubt, for them to achieve the ambitions that are set out, we will need to work with them at a GB level, because there are reserved issues which are intertwined within some of the areas that they're keen to look at. We have a Director of Human Rights who's based in our London office, and we work closely with them and with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. We're planning a meeting quite soon to share where we're at with our business planning at a GB level, and to ensure that we can work as collaboratively as possible together.
Okay. Given the cutting budget, etc., is there scope here for closer collaboration? I mean, and given the crossover that's clear across a number of issues, is there a case for closer collaboration between the two to maybe amalgamate the expertise?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to work as closely as we can. As I say, we have different powers, so it makes sense for us to maintain our identity. There's a conference on next month, actually. It'll be interesting because very little has been done so far in terms of researching the impact of bringing equality and human rights together. And there's been a major piece of research undertaken which will be reporting next month. And I think that'll be really useful to look at, because I think there is an assumption that we should be working more closely together. But at times, because of the way equality law is set up in terms of protected characteristics, and some of the sort of foundations of where equality law comes from, and then the more, I suppose, person-centred but sort of universal aspects of human rights, it's not always easy to articulate that connection, and therefore it's not always easy to develop a programme of work which addresses both those aspects. So one of which is obviously very much orientated on the needs of groups of people who have experienced prejudice and discrimination in society, and understanding why that is and how we address that through a range of different levers against some of our broader, more principle-based aspects of human rights. But without a doubt, we are, I think we do work pretty well together. We worked even better together when we're all based in the same office in Glasgow, but sadly we've had to downsize a bit. So, but we do have regular meetings, and as I say, we've got collaborative work. I'm sitting on the writing group for the Scottish National Action Plan for Human Rights. So we do, we work together well strategically and at an officer level. I don't think that, I can't see any obvious areas where we would, at this stage, want to work more closely without muddying necessarily some of the waters.
Okay, thanks very much. I look forward to the report.
John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. A couple of questions, just if we can get some information on the record, please. The first to you, Ms Welsh. You mentioned the Disability Rights Commission's helpline. And my understanding is that CITL, who now have your helpline, won the contract to operate that, but that it was eventually taken back in-house because it was so poor and non-responsive. Is that the case?
No.
You may not wish to comment on why, but can you confirm that it was taken back in-house?
No. My memory of it was that, we gave a contract to CITEL, and what we then did was base some of our staff with CITEL to give them the support that they needed to improve their service. It wasn't taken back in-house. CITEL still provided the advice and had the contract, but we did provide them with support. And then when the DRC went and the EHRC was set up, then we brought the helpline fully in-house.
Right, I'm confused if that's a yes or a no then, but the helpline, right, okay, we'll perhaps leave that one. Can I ask in relation to, and I can't call it it's yourself or Mr Pringle that talked about, following on from Siobhan McMahon's questions about the equal pay, there was talk of research staff. Can you explain who they would be, please?
Well, our intention is to put out a tender to bring in a consultancy, if you like, of researchers. We will tell them what it is that we want them to be looking at, and they will then do the work of actually going out, bringing in all the outcomes in the publications and checking that those have been done according to a set of criteria that we will provide them with. So they will analyse the information in effect, and we will then use that information to look at...
can I confirm, has that always been the practice?
Yes, it would be for a big piece of work like that. Yeah, we would normally get consultants, I think, to do that kind of research for us.
That's not at the expense of staff?
No, we've always, that's sort of standard practices for big pieces of work, or for pieces of work which we don't necessarily have that expertise, we would contract out. So that's sort of standard practice across the Commission.
With regard to that, my understanding is that the PCS union had a proposed structure that included policy and research officers with a complement of 21 in the staff. Are you able to comment why that wasn't progressed?
My understanding is that the reality is that we have we've had a range of voluntary exit schemes available to staff, and staff have left for new posts. We were working towards, in June 2012, I think, as we've already said, the potential staff complement of 10. So it was a very difficult...
Can I ask what the basis of that was then? Because clearly, people take the opportunity if the fear posts are going to move, and then if we hear subsequently that your complement's 17, 79.
That news only became available in December of this year. That's when our final budget agreement was made, and we were aware that we would not have to lose any more staff. So the intention had been to run a couple of voluntary exit schemes, knowing that we were going to have our budget cut to a certain extent to try and manage that moving forward. But it was only in December of this year that the budgets were announced, that we were aware that we could keep the level of staff that we have across GB. That in a way does not allow for a plan, necessarily a clearly planned set of departures. So we were working towards agreeing a new operating model.
Sorry, there was sufficient funding to retain the existing staff complement?
As of December 2012, when the budgets were announced, we had, at that point, we had in the region of 200 staff, and the budget that was announced for 2013-14, 14-15 allowed us to retain that level of staff. We were still working towards a worst case scenario of ending up with in the region of 10 staff in Scotland up to that point.
Would you intend recruiting staff?
We currently have 15 full-time equivalents in the Scotland Directorate. Near the end of last year, we lost 2 staff who went for new posts elsewhere, not through voluntary exit. We are now in discussions at a GB level to recruit those posts, and in principle we plan to do that.
And where does that sit with the model of 21 posts proposed by the trade union?
The 21 post I don't think was ever, at that point we were never, that was not something we were able to afford or to commit to. So that the unions were suggesting that we should work towards a model of 21 staff. In reality, we were working towards the potential of only having 10 staff. So that was what the unions aspired to, against what we believed we were going to have money available for. I'm just going to check with Ian whether, because I came in nearly
the chronology is very important there, of course, because, as I say, people take the opportunity to, if they think that there are posts going, to take up other posts.
Absolutely.
And if you're saying there's sufficient resource to have retained the original complement, then I'm wondering why.
Not the original complement, the complement that we had as of December, which was 200 staff across the organisation, not the complement we had.
I don't wish to be
in
parochial. You know, our
Yeah.
remit is exclusively Scotland here, so I'm trying to understand what the complement in Scotland was then.
Well, it's a very fair point, but just to reiterate, we were in a position of in spring of last year, as Alistair said, where we were having to plan for on the basis of the opening proposals for our budget by GEO and a very significant reduction in staff, and it would only be fair and proper, anticipating that reduction, to offer staff the best options, one of which would be the voluntary exit scheme. And the voluntary exit scheme, based on the anticipated headcount for the next 2 years at that time, that scheme closed before we then received our final budget settlement offer, as a result of very significant work that we did to argue for the case of retaining more staff capacity. So what we were able to do is arrive at a situation where we had to plan in the spring for a significant reduction of staff. That reduction of staff did not materialise, and we won an agreement for a budget settlement for next year and the year after of roughly 200 staff, which meant, in effect, at that point when we got the information late in December, that we would not have to make any staff compulsory redundant over the next 2 years. So we started from a position where we were much more pessimistic about the headcount that we would need.
What was the headcount for staff in Scotland at that point then, please?
It was roughly 20.
It's 20.
Yeah, the figure the union came up with from memory was very roughly, in fact it was slightly more than the staff that we already had in Scotland, the staff that we had in Scotland. So they were basically saying retain what we have. People then left, not only on VE, but 2 or 3 people left. So nobody's been made redundant since then. There hasn't been.
So that's 5 of the 20 that left then?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure between full-time equivalents and part-time staff, but roughly.
Would it be possible to share that information and the chronology
absolutely.
with the committee, because that would help advise our deliberations?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mark O'Brien.
Just very briefly on one of the things that you had raised there, you said you'd used consultants for research work, presumably on a contractual basis. Have you used individuals or organisations, and if organisations, which organisations?
We use them on a regular basis, so we could share that information with you afterwards, rather than sort of try and reel off a list of names.
Predominantly, is it individual researchers that are contracted, or is it organisations?
It's probably a mixture, is it?
I honestly don't know.
Can we come back to that? Yeah, sorry.
Forward to
I know the name of some organisations that we've worked with over the years, so I think primarily organisations.
Yes, I mean, we do routinely, as institutions like us do, commission academic research, because that is a specialism that we would rely on, that we wouldn't have ever had the capacity to do in-house.
Okay. Do committee members have any further questions for our panel of witnesses? Can I then thank our witnesses very much for coming along this morning to give us their evidence. I will now suspend the meeting and we will reconvene at 10:30. Agenda item 2 this morning is consideration of the committee's work programme, and we've been asked by MECOP to sponsor an event in June 2013, and this coincides with our sponsorship of MECOP's Moving Minds exhibition, which focuses on Gypsy Traveller carers and is timed to coincide with Carers Week. Now, we have a brief paper explaining the event, and I'm happy to take comments from the committee on sponsoring, or if you're happy just to agree to sponsor it. So we agree to sponsor the event?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That's now agreed. And that concludes our formal meeting. Our next meeting will take place on Thursday the 7th of March. And because this will include consideration of our draft report on where Gypsy Travellers live, it will take place in private. So thank you all very much this morning for your attendance.